tear, it falls and hits the ground. A tree, it falls without a sound. A bird, it calls and sends you home. A man, he sits in the cold all alone.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for joining me on the Joy of Sunflowers. Please tell everyone a little bit more about you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Ella. This is such a much needed event because oftentimes we feel really alone in this whole process. And I'm Natalie Torres Haddad. Most people know me as Financially Savvy Latina. I am the owner and also co-host of Financially Savvy in 20 Minute podcast. I'm a two-time TEDx speaker on the subjects of financial literacy. If you haven't seen the first one, it's the foreign language of financial literacy. I actually teach financial literacy as it's been my job, my purpose, my work for the past 2 decades now, and I love it. And so, along with that, I'm an author. I'm an award-winning author as well as a best-selling author. I have 5 books, but the first one is the one that got the award-winning, and then the fourth one got best-selling. So it's been a really amazing journey that I've had career-wise. I've got to travel all over the world as well as the country, and I get to speak to major corporations and universities and basically share the experience and knowledge I have with my degrees also in finance and international business. So that's the business money side of me. And the personal side, I think that's one of the reasons why you reached out to me is I've started to become very public about my fertility journey with my husband. It's been a long journey for us, and I know we'll get more into it as we go along. But about a couple of years ago, I publicly posted about how the difficulties that come with that, not just trying to conceive, but unfortunately, we've had multiple pregnancy losses. And so along with that, I've explained, the cost that comes with that, financial costs, mental costs, physical costs, everything, right? It really can drain you. And because I talk about money, I focus a lot about explaining to people also what IVF looks like, what IUIs look like, just the medication, the treatments, the supplements. I mean, the list goes on really. So I'm really honored to be a part of this because I wish there was more information out there. And I know I've learned a lot lately in the last few years of type of resources and support groups that are now out there. But I think because this has been such a long journey for us, almost 9 years, my husband and I suffered in silence for years because we didn't really know who to turn to or who was going through something similar. So my goal hopefully today is to not only share some insight, but to give people the tools that they need in order to deal with whatever they're dealing in their infertility or fertility journey.
Yeah, that's so true. And a lot of what you were saying is how a lot of us feel like when we burst into this journey, it gets opened up to us through usually some kind of loss or not being able to do something. And then, yeah, it's just this bombardment of like information, but medical information, not sort of necessarily the true information. And those women who are out there speaking about it, it takes a bit of time sometimes to get to that information. And I think, yeah, that's really a big part of what we're trying to do with this event, is just kind of give those resources and those tools that women can kind of go to. So thank you so much for joining us, and being part of this and sharing your story, because that is so brave and so amazing. And it really does change how we all feel when we're in this, when we see a fellow woman going through it. And I know you were one of the first sort of women that I saw that was going through it like me, and it was really comforting to just feel like, okay, I'm not alone, this is valid, it's okay to be upset. So yeah, so thank you on an even personal level.
Thank you so much. It's mutual. It's a mutual feeling when you meet what we call women within our tribe or within this group that nobody wants to be a part of, unfortunately, because no one does, and I don't wish that on anyone. But it just becomes this sisterhood that we all need.
Yeah, I love the saying, it's a worst club, best members, because
Yes.
it just makes you feel
Yes.
better.
Agree.
Uh,
Agree.
and I feel like a lot of women are supportive in that way. So let's start from the beginning. So did you always know that you wanted to have kids, or was it something that you kind of moved towards?
Yeah, I was that little girl that I always knew I wanted to have a family. I've been blessed with an incredible family. My parents are amazing. I have a younger brother, and we're that. You see us. There's like four of us. Like this. They got one of each, and we had a really wonderful, happy childhood. Like they did everything to give us the world. They were really young to have us as well. They were both 22 when they had us. So culturally as well, I'm Latina. I'm from El Salvador originally. I was born there and pretty much raised all my life in the US, in LA. But I lived in other countries as well. And culturally for Latinos, it was kind of like assume you're going to have a family, right? And I never really thought about it because I thought it would come naturally. No one in our family had any issues. Most of my cousins and close friends had their kids, some were teenagers, some were in their early 20s. Very few had their kids later on in life after 30. And so I assumed it'd be easy, right? And my husband and I, we met each other in college actually, but we didn't start seeing each other till later on in life. And we got married at 31 and we immediately wanted to have kids. So as soon as we got married, we were that naive couple that were like, maybe our wedding night we'll have a baby, right? We'll get pregnant. And it didn't happen that way. And so the first couple years, it wasn't necessarily what we were like, oh my God, this has to happen. Why isn't it happening? We just wanted to let it happen naturally. We didn't want to become that couple that timed it and all these things that you basically hear horror stories of, right? And so after a few years, the fact that it wasn't happening, I became worried and decided to visit my OB. I actually did have a chemical pregnancy. And for most people who don't know what that means, it's usually you lose a baby within the first 5 weeks. And so, you think you're pregnant, you see the positive pregnancy, and then you go to the doctor and it's no longer there. Right. And so, for a few years, I only told about three people, those closest to me. But even that, it took me years to publicly say something to them because not that I was ashamed and embarrassed. I often hear that for women, and I completely understand why that can be an issue. But for me, it was I didn't want to acknowledge that that happened to me. It's almost kind of like, if it didn't happen, it, wouldn't affect me. And because I wasn't attached to that particular loss and it happened so quickly that, a few days later I wasn't pregnant. So it was this thing I didn't want to talk about to anyone really. I didn't really know I needed to. And so I was about 36 years, no, 35, 36 years old already. When I was speaking to my OB, I'm like, something's happening. Why hasn't this happened for us? And we've been married at that point already 5 years and we really wanted to be parents. And so she started, she's like, okay, well, are we timing it? And, we'll start doing that. And we were timing in every app possible as well as, the thermometer, everything that you could think of. And then it wasn't happening naturally. So we decided to venture. I didn't even know IUI existed. I thought IVF was really the only route, which was extremely and still is extremely expensive. So we decided to do IUI, which is less invasive. There's no surgery involved. And basically it's like a turkey baster for those that don't know. You're still using your spouse's sperm and it's basically the way the doctor explained it to me. It was so cute. She's like, just imagining we're building an off-ramp for your for the sperm to not have to travel as far and basically get quicker to the egg. And we're timing it, right? So that way during that small window of ovulation, hopefully it meets, right? So the first three
Yeah.
times we did this procedure, I did no medications whatsoever. And it was timed, right? So it didn't work. And we're like, okay, something. And she didn't find anything, right? We did all the testing and nothing was coming up. And thank God for that. Luckily, nothing was showing any signs of either one of us having infertility issues. And so then we went into deeper testing and she referred me to a specialist, right? A reproductive specialist. And with those physicians there, we decided, okay, let's try IUI and see if it works this time with medication. And so we did like the lowest dosage possible because it turns out I'm really sensitive to medication. So my ovaries like shut down if I take too much compared to most women that can take more stimulus. And so lo and behold, the fourth time we did it with first time medication, we got pregnant. And so here we're like extremely excited. And this was in 2021. We didn't tell anybody because we wanted to, wait right away. We actually told my parents, because they knew we were going through this procedures. And at the 6 week mark, we told them. And at this point, we already had seen the sac. We had been in the doctors pretty much every other day at that point. And then we started going in every week. And the unthinkable happens, right? No one expects that to happen to them. And we went in for my 9 week, was a little over 9 week checkup. And they had mentioned that I had a silent miscarriage. And so what that means for those that might not understand what that is, it is my body was still producing the hormone, HCG and all that. And so I was still having morning sickness, which I have intense morning sickness. I had headaches, nausea all day, pretty much till about 4. And I was like, I don't understand. I'm still experiencing, and my stomach's starting to show at this point, right? And so I have a really short torso, so my belly popped out right pretty much right away. When my acupuncturist, so she's like, "Oh my gosh, there's a belly," and I'm like, "Yeah, right." And it was a shock to us, and so because even when they were explaining it to you, you're trying to process what basically they're telling me, and at this point we already had seen the heartbeat multiple times for when we would go in, heard it as well as them. That moment, I knew something was wrong because I didn't see any movement as opposed to before. And so, the doctor came in. It was the doctor, the nurse, as well as the ultrasound technician. And, they had to basically tell us that there was now no longer a heartbeat. And, for us as parents to be, in our mind, we were already parents because we were preparing this process, years before. And then up to that year, the physical supplements and, treatments and everything that you put yourself through because you want to have a baby. It was a blow. And the timing was always, it's never a good time, right? And it was literally, my dad's best friend had just passed away. So his funeral was the following day. We missed the viewing that day because we thought, okay, we'll go to our checkup in the morning, then we'll make it to the viewing in the evening. But unfortunately, we couldn't function. And I told my parents, "I'm sorry, we're going to see you tomorrow." And I, let them know that I had lost our baby that night. And so it was difficult for all of us too. That's another thing. Grief is not just the couple or the person that's going through it. It's, grandparents to be, my brother, like everyone was just so excited. And we went to the funeral the next day, and I swear I bawled like crazy. My cousin was there, was one of my best friends, and some of my aunties at my mom's sister, she told them. And so they, luckily they were there to give us hugs and, say they were sorry or their condolences. So in a way we had like this mourning set day, basically. We were, burying my uncle, my dad's best friend, and we were mourning the loss of our baby in silence, kind of, because no one else knew except for immediate family. And so in a way, I always look back at that time. I'm like, okay, we had that moment. And I could talk about this now that I'm crying because I've had a lot of therapy, and who knows down the line in our interview. But when that happened, you kind of try to function like you're in a daze. It's a nightmare that you're living and you're not really sure what's happening. And the worst part for me too is because I didn't have any symptoms yet of a miscarriage. So my body was still going through the motions. And that's what happens. They say silent is that your body hasn't registered that you've lost the baby. So they're still pumping blood. All that stuff is still working, the placenta, everything, right? And so they said if you don't pass naturally, you have the option of doing a DNC. And so for a couple weeks, I had to carry my dead baby, basically. And it was the worst feeling in the world. And I had to have a DNC. And thank God for my OB. She was on vacation, was going to be on vacation. It was the week of Thanksgiving here in the States. And I said, when can we schedule the surgery? And it was either going to be on the November 30th, which for us is our wedding anniversary. And I thought, no, I can't do it on my wedding. I can't have this day also be, extra sad for us. And so luckily she's like, okay, I'll come in my day off a week before. And we went in on the 22nd. And so that experience was traumatic. And I almost don't want to get into the whole thing because I feel like I will completely start crying. That whole process is very traumatic. And for those that don't know what a DNC, it's a form of abortion as well. It's done usually within, I believe, the first 15 weeks of pregnancy. And so, going into the hospital pregnant with your little belly and then coming out no longer pregnant, you're still, you're still, having all the hormones. And I luckily was asleep through the process, so I didn't have to endure, that. I just woke up from the procedure, which is really crazy because I talked about this on our podcast about the cost of doing this type of abortion, this type of treatments, procedures. Luckily, our insurance covered like 90% of it, but yet we still had to pay a couple $1,000s out of pocket. And I think like I can't imagine, especially in parts of our country in the States. I know people are in Australia watching this and other places, but there's a lot of states that are now banning that, which is, I still cannot believe that that's happened in our country. It's frustrating. But I was fortunate that I'm in California, and that's not an issue for us. And so fast forward a couple months later, I'm trying to do the best I can, trying to function. The holidays were the worst, and anyone that's had a pregnancy loss that know that the holidays are always hardest, especially when it's that close to the holidays. Everybody wants you to act normal, and because very few, even our closest family members, like our siblings, didn't really get to connect with us during that pregnancy because it was so early on, that I was almost kind of dismissed. And not that they meant to do that, it's just it happens. And that's why these conferences are so important for people to understand how they can support, how they can be there for people that they say, unfortunate when it comes to pregnancy loss, it's one of the loneliest type of losses because very few people actually know how to react or show up for the people, right? Because you might not have a funeral, you might not have these these events in your life that help you grieve with your family, right? Especially culturally, I mentioned that when we lose a family loved one, it's like there's this whole procedure where not procedure, it's just part of what we go through about showing up to the home with food and then going through, viewings and then the actual funeral and then the like there's all these things that lead up to letting go. And so having to do that alone was really difficult. I was in complete depression, and luckily I had been in therapy for many years. And so I had my therapist, and I had the support that I needed from my parents, and my husband was just amazing, even though he's going through the loss himself. That's a whole nother conversation, right? How men deal with, or partners deal with the loss. Fast forward, I got pregnant again. We decided to do another round of IUI because it worked. And the doctor was like, we did an autopsy when the baby passed, right? So it was a chromosome imbalance. And so, it just happens as I'm older, I'm in my 40s now. That means there's less chances of good eggs. And so he's like, you can try again if that's the issue. And I wanted to. And I said, let's try one more time. And I actually didn't get pregnant during that IUI. And so this was sometime in January. Then we tried the next cycle and I got pregnant. And so we're like, okay, this time I'm extremely cautious. And the hard part of the year before was because we thought, oh, we had medication this time. We had medical, help, that this is going to happen for us. We're not going to lose again. Right. And of course, you're just not ready for something like that. And then in February, and I got pregnant, our first checkup, because it was so early, it was at 6 weeks that I went in. They let me know it was going to be a not viable pregnancy. And it was such a hard hit because they saw the heartbeat. And I was like, first, actually, they didn't see the heartbeat because it was still early on. The next week, they saw the heartbeat. And so you're hearing that this is going to happen, that your baby's going to pass. It's not a viable embryo past that, right? And every week we would go in and there was some kind of progress. It wasn't good progress. It was still progress though. And then I heard the heartbeat, and that was just, and they wanted me to hear it, which now looking back, I wish they wouldn't have, but because we could see it, you can see that it was consistent. And so in my head, I'm like, maybe it's a miracle baby. Maybe things will change, right? And that's what every, mom wants, and the thing to happen to their kid. And when I heard the heartbeat, the doctor had to explain to me, she's like, can you hear the difference that it's not a strong heartbeat because it trickles here and it slows down basically here. And that was heartbreaking because my husband went to all the doctor's appointments with me except for this one because he had to teach that day. So I went in on my own, and hearing the heartbeat and then coming home and having to explain to him like how freaking excruciating that was. It was kind of like you're going through the motions. And for about 2 weeks, I just cried. Every day I just was trying to figure a way to function, try to work, but you couldn't help but cry because it was just like, this is the saddest thing. I'm carrying this baby that I'm going to lose, even though I'm still praying for a miracle, and that's what you do. And then at the 8-week, I started to feel contractions, and within an hour and a half, I passed, I passed it. And seeing the sac, the gestation, and everything that comes out it's traumatizing. And so now I had experienced that form of loss. About 2 months later, we unexpectedly got pregnant. And this was naturally, and I wasn't expecting that. So we're like, okay, that's weird. And, maybe I'm like, oh, you hear that all the time where people go through treatments and then they get pregnant naturally. And so we're like, okay, maybe this is it. Right. And so at this point, I'm extremely scared because that happens. every woman and any pregnancy is always has some kind of doubt or fear, but only those that have that actually lost a pregnancy understand the level of, what do we say, optimistically cautious. That's the term that we hear often. I'm optimistically cautious. But this point, when you've had more than one, that's a whole nother level. When I hear other women say they've lost one, but I'm like, when you lose another one, when you lose a second one, when you use a third baby, it's really hard to find peace with what's happening, right? And so this time we got pregnant, but once again, it was a chemical pregnancy. Within the 5th week, I got my period, and the doctor confirmed it, right? And so I thought, okay, maybe something will happen. And now this is months of treatment. And then I thought, because I've gone through all that, okay, it's time to try IVF. And it wasn't really me that was pushing it. It was my husband. He was so wonderful and so overprotective. He's like, I can't see you go through another pregnancy loss. It's just too much for your body, mentally and physically, everything. And so he's like, why don't we try IVF? And it was extremely expensive. And luckily for us, we saved some money. But that's also heartbreaking because it took us years to save up to have this like emergency fund or baby fund or whatever you want to call it. And now we're using it because what our insurance doesn't cover. And most insurances in the US don't cover for fertility or IVF treatments or IUI. And so everything's out of pocket for us. And that's thousands of dollars, right? In the US, it runs from $15,000 to $30,000 per treatment, per, IVF cycle. So I went in for my first IVF cycle, not really knowing what to know. I knew enough from the support group that I had joined. Shout out to Resolve, which is a national organization, nonprofit, where my other support women told me what they went through their IVF journeys, and so I kind of had some. But you really don't know. You really don't know prepared how you're going to be with the hormones. And turns out the hormones were actually shutting down my ovaries because I was too sensitive to the medication. So once again, they're like, Clomid is pretty much the most you can handle. So it wasn't a good egg retrieval. Unfortunately, the ones that we did genetic testing weren't viable. And so I went ahead and started another cycle. And halfway through the cycle, I had to cancel after doing the medication because I got COVID for the first time. After 3 years, I was like, oh, I thought I was going to be that person, right? So that sucked. And you still have to pay when not full, but you still pay a cancellation fee, which there you go, a few $1,000s down the drain. And then the third cycle I actually did a retrieval. Once again, it didn't work. And then I did one more with medication and I got a cold. It's just a regular cold. And so I had to cancel that. So the fact that you go through those emotions, through the physical, mental aspect is extremely difficult. But what I had to come to peace with was like, okay, at least this time around, I was not, because I went through the losses, because I went through IUI, I felt I was ready for IVF at that point. Right. And most people don't understand this because oftentimes for women that are trying to conceive, we hear, you should try IVF, you should try IVF. And I understand why, because if you're younger, you have more chances of getting quality eggs, hopefully in one cycle. But the reality is for most women, if you're older, above the age of 35, you're going to have to do more than one round. And that is also a harsh reality, right? Because most people don't go to IVF first. It's the last resort. And so for me, it came that I had peace after. I'm like, okay, I know I tried it. I hated the way I felt. I hated what my body was going through. Oh, and a side note, for most people that don't know what IVF, there's so many different side effects, right? You're basically pumping hormones into your body with these shots, right? And so, and these shots hurt. I've heard people talking about, it, I'm like, they're just lightweights. Like, I have a high tolerance when it comes to pain, I guess. But it's not necessarily the needles. It's actually the liquid that's being put into your body. Oh my God. The first few times I was like, it felt like somebody was socking me. And my husband could tell I was in so much pain because my tears would just, come down. And it was just, it's also another, you lose the intimacy, right? You can't have intercourse during that time. And then there's this like, the intimacy is on a whole different level now, right? Your husband's administering shots for you, and bless him because he did the best he could. And but it's this whole process that we had to go through, right? And what I always look back on that was, okay, we tried, at least I know what to expect at that moment. I don't know if at this point in my life right now, if I can go through another cycle. And then fast forward now, when you guys are watching this now, unfortunately, I actually had another pregnancy loss at the beginning of this year, beginning of February of 2023. We got pregnant Christmas Day and having no one told anybody because we wanted to wait. We wanted to, go further down the line. And then that happens. Right. And so along this whole process, it's like you're trying to navigate your infertility that comes with this. You navigate the unsolicited advice that you get from people. And I know it always comes well intentioned usually, but it's also people don't know. And the majority of people include, and my doctor, I love her for saying this. She's like, you know what? Don't worry. She's like, I know a lot of people try to give you advice, especially parents. And I say that because a lot of like, oh, this is what I did when I get pregnant, or this is, so it's like the one, they don't know what's happening to you, your body or your husband's body, but a lot of them don't even understand how they got pregnant. If you ask them, oh, when did you ovulate? When did you know, and for them, they had no idea how that works, right? Because it just happened naturally for them. So it's always hard to hear because you just try to like bite your tongue and, people try to uplift you and keep you positive. I understand that. But I also feel, I don't know if it's disservice is the word I want to say, but it doesn't help when people say don't give up because you know what? Maybe giving up is okay as well because you're physically, financially, mentally drained. And maybe you need a break from that. And I know for me, I took a few months off after my IVF cycle, which I needed because I no longer wanted to feel like hormonal and physically, you're going through the process. And I had my cousin's wedding during my second IVF cycle, which is insane because what I tell people that is because when you're doing the shots, your body is also getting bloated and you look like you are gaining weight, right? And so most women even warn me like you're gonna gain probably about 10 pounds. I'm like, what? And lo and behold, I looked huge and, it's a sad game because I would say, oh yeah, you're trying to get pregnant, but you look like you're 4 months pregnant. It's horrible. And every woman warned me about it. And so I'm going to this wedding and everyone's probably like, oh, is she pregnant? Or is she, and I'm like, luckily, I told my cousin, I'm like, no, I'm doing the treatments right now, literally taking the shots. And so that was also really hard because for women that are going through this, your body changes so much, not just from pregnancy, but preparing for pregnancy, right? And there was times that I felt like I didn't recognize myself because of that physical strain that it takes, emotionally what it takes, grief alone. We all know if we've lost a loved one, which my husband's lost his dad, we've lost grandparents, we know that type of pain. And I'll tell you that our pregnancy losses have been the most difficult grieving mourning process that we've had to learn to endure. And I think it's once again because of the lack of education and the lack of support that there is still. And it's still considered a taboo subject that nobody wants to talk about. And it's difficult to talk about that. I get it. But I feel the more and more we normalize these conversations, even for a long time, I would just say miscarriage. And I understand the terms that come with everything because of not just medical purposes, but when we say miscarriage too, it dehumanizes the process. When I let people know it's a pregnancy loss, it kind of sits more with them. And oftentimes when people tell me, oh, you were early on, at least that's okay. It's like, no, I still went through a DNC. I still went through feeling the contractions, going into labor, all these things that women don't talk about, the bleeding, everything that comes along with losing a pregnancy is not only traumatic physically, but mentally, right? And so normalizing, talking about this, having events like this, hopefully we can learn to support each other and how we talk to each other, because I think the worst comment that I would get, and I know I may at one point might have said it to someone, and now I'm like, I will never say that, is when people say, after you've told them that you've had this pregnancy loss, that your baby's is gone, that they don't say my condolences. They usually say this, and it's so hurtful. And it's kind of like everything happens for a reason. And you hear that and you're like, you would never say that to someone that lost a parent or a child or a loved one. That's sure, if you believe in that, I get that, but not to say that when someone's like, hey, my baby just died 2 weeks ago and you're telling me that this was meant to be and this was my fourth time going through this. And I think those are the conversations we should have. How do we say, like, I'm so sorry for your loss? The best ones I would hear is like, I'm so sorry for your loss. What is it that I can, do for you? Or, getting a nice card in the mail or flowers, or my friends would bring me food, or, the whole process of when you lose a loved one. Right. And so I know that's a long conversation and a long explanation of what we've been through, but it's also the short version of what I'm saying, what we've been through in this past almost now decade. And so I'm fortunate enough that I have a support group now. It took me about a year and a half to find one. I didn't know they existed online through Zoom. And I've also recently joined a pregnancy after loss group, and all of them are pregnant women that have lost, and I was really nervous to join because I was like, how am I going to feel about this? Because it still is triggering, you see these baby announcements on social media, people that have been married shortly, they get pregnant right away, or friends that have gotten married about the same time now have multiple kids, and we're still in this journey, and it's hard, right? And so I feel like I digress, but it's all in place. And for me, I feel fortunate that, my husband and I are, we're both 41, and it's, our time is short, and meaning I know what my time frame is. I know what my egg count is, all that stuff. And so I don't have the luxury of someone that, is trying in their 30s or their 20s. But I think women should also be educated on this, because now looking back, I'm like, I wish I would have frozen my eggs in my 20s, or even at 18 or whatever, and just having some kind of a backup. And even that doesn't guarantee it. But so often now I hear women in their mid 30s and, later in life that they're like, I wish I would have done this when I was, in my 20s, because it is just so physically difficult and different when you're going through that process.
Yeah, so true. And I think, I mean, the education just isn't there. When you're at school, you get told, you do the thing and you have a baby. And obviously Hollywood tells us, okay, well, if you can't have a baby, then you just do IVF. You just do it.
Yes.
Like it's a thing. It's just
Yeah,
have a
you
baby.
can shell out all the money, and I met so many women that had to take out loans for their IVF procedures, and you're right. It's also not only a rich person's game, but in the US it's still primarily white couples that can afford to do this, because even my husband, when we go to clinics, we're usually only the brown people in the facility, and we think about like how fortunate him and I are financially to be able to do that. And it's that where it's like, it's still, you see celebrities, you're excited when they're like, oh cool, Janet Jackson at 50, and Hillary Swank at 48. But you have to look deeper into that conversation, where I think it gives false hope for women that they can have kids at that latent age in the game. One, they have to have a lot of money for that. And when I say read into really what they went through, like I love how Gabrielle Union, she talked about her 8 pregnancy losses, but how expensive IVF and all that was. And she also eventually ended up doing surrogacy. And so I think that's the important conversation to have too, because oftentimes we hear so and so had a baby in their 40s, but technically it was surrogacy, or maybe they had younger eggs when they froze them, or they had donor eggs or donor embryos. So now there's this whole conversation of what IVF really looks like. And I think sometimes we're not only educating women wrong, we're not giving them enough information to make those decisions when they need to.
Yeah, and it is like one of those things, even when it comes to the age, they're like, oh no, you can wait. You can wait until you're like past 30, and
Yeah.
you've got your career and you've had all this, career, and maybe you've even bought a house. You can
Yeah.
wait that amount of time. That's fine. Your body will do what you want it to.
Yeah. And some
Um,
have that, very few people have that. It felt like everybody, I'm like, oh, is everyone getting pregnant naturally and it's happening? And you'll be surprised. So many women have reached out to me privately and said, you know what, actually my baby was through IVF, and they haven't, and it's nobody's business. So I completely understand, if you don't want people to know, and you go through this whole process. But I also think that's why we should be talking about that, because I think, wow, all these women that have reached out to me that I know personally, and they've never mentioned it to anyone publicly because, whatever the reason, and they have every right to. I also think, well, then you're giving false hope for these young women that are in their 20s and 30s that are fulfilling their careers, or whatever situations that they want to be, if they decide to have a family. And I think when they start saying, hey, this is how I got my babies, like, really think about what that takes a toll on your body.
yeah, and I think a lot of women would probably choose differently if
Hmm.
there was that thought of, I could run out of time. I
Yeah.
mean, for me, I kind of did have that thought. I did have that thought of I'm a ticking time
Yeah.
clock, And my husband and I got together very young. We wanted to have kids, and we started in our 20s because we were together and we could.
Right.
And luckily for us, for the first 3, it was all the fairy tale, everything was amazing.
Yeah.
And you take it for granted, and then you have two losses, and then everything gets put into perspective.
Yeah.
But
And you're
yeah,
right. It's like you learn different
oh,
at different times of, like you're saying, like you know, and it's crazy because I appreciate women's bodies so much more, right? Because and
yeah,
women that have lost and are, I think, are warriors because they're still managing to, move forward. But it's that too, where it's kind of, there is a big difference. And I had that very difficult conversations with a couple of my cousins, who I had two that had lost pregnancy losses. However, they had them after they had children already. And most of them were when they were in their 20s, right? And so their way of consulting me or trying to like give me some support was, like, oh, this happened to me. And I get that, because then it's like, okay, we kind of understand what you're going through. But the fact that they downplayed it so much, I think that was the hardest part too, because I said, hold on, you guys weren't even trying to get pregnant and it happened. And you actually got to enjoy your first pregnancy and love the process of being pregnant. I go, for me, I don't have that. I will never have that again. The first excitement that my husband and I have, we even filmed it, like getting excited, seeing that positive pregnancy test and the whole process of telling your parents and all that, and your siblings. And we will never be able to have that, right? And I'm praying that we will be able to get pregnant again and have our baby and everything. But I think that's something that is, once again, that conversation of how we support women that are having losses before their children. And I had one girlfriend who reached out. She was amazing, who lost 3 pregnancies before her first child, and she had total 10 pregnancies, 7 miscarriages. And she has 3 kids now, luckily. And she was the one that I would tell her, and I'm going to start crying now, but she kept me alive. Like, she would check on me every day and would send me a text. And this is someone I hadn't talked to in a couple of years, because we're seeing because of the pandemic, but because she understood the toll of not only having someone that's gone through it more than once, but having to go through that process alone. Because the ones that you do, like I had a couple cousins that had a 1 miscarriage, missed that. Like, they didn't understand. And it was frustrating for me, because I was like, you don't understand. It's not the same thing. And the fact that we spent thousands of dollars, there's a difference of getting pregnant naturally, and there's a difference of paying literally thousands of dollars. We could have bought a car, which we needed one, an extra one, that we could have done these things that we needed to pay for. And there's this emotional frustration and resentment that was there. I don't feel it as much anymore, because I'm like, they didn't know. This is part of the conversation. But it's that, yeah, you take some of those things for granted. But I think also, as women, the fact that you've gone through losses as well, like you started doing this event, right? You start connecting with other women that need the support, and hopefully we can not only uplift each other and hopefully give us the hope that we need to either move forward with our baby journey, or to at least know that we're seen and being comforted through a loss. Because I know 2 of my friends going through premenopause at 40, and the fact that they can no longer have kids, it's heartbreaking. And so you just, once again, it's this conversation that we wish we would have had, because even then they're like, I didn't know I could get it at 40. I thought it was something in your 50s and 60s. And so again, conversation and having the support that we need.
yeah, I think just opening up the conversation of women's health in general could really do a world of good. Because yeah, like menopause, premenopause, like I've heard of some strange cases where menopause happened like really young,
Yeah.
like even as early as like premenopause at 16. Like there is some crazy cases in the world. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm faced with possible like early menopause or
Premenopause or
premenopause
yeah. Yeah. And that's
at
exactly, there's
the
all
age of,
different stages of that too, right? Yeah.
yeah, at the age of like 42. I'm possibly going to be facing that, because I've got members of my family who, like the women, have gone through that at the age of sort of 42.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, okay, so that's my clock. Like
Right.
in my head, I'm like setting it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there really is as well, just going to the point of pregnancy before loss and pregnancy after loss. There really is a difference. And you're so right. Like the amount of women I've spoken to, and like speaking to my husband about it as well. Like obviously I offload onto him a lot of the time, bless him. I come off these meetings and I'm like, oh, it was so amazing. Like she's so amazing. like this warrior woman, and it's so sad. And he's just
Yes.
like, okay.
I get it. I get it.
But there really is a difference between going through, infertility or pregnancy losses in the, for the first pregnancies, and then or having a baby, first, and then going through losses, because it's almost like that child can pull you through regardless, because you have to, because you're a parent and you have, like, you've got a living child in front of you.
Yeah.
I always like to say, like, you're still a parent, you're still mom. Like, you
Yeah.
may not have your child in front of you, but you are still mom, because you still have to deal with that
And
that
that is
feeling.
so beautiful you said that because I mean that's something where I applaud moms like you because you have to show up for your children, your living children, right? And one of my friends, she's become a really good friend. I met her through a group as well. Has 3 kids, but has had just suffered 3 pregnancy losses in the past year and a half. And it's been so difficult for her, she already deals with depression. And so it's kind of those things that I'm like, wow, moms really do are super women because the fact that you have to show up for them when it's hard enough for you to show up for yourself. And, postpartum is real that we don't talk enough about that. Not necessarily, most people think of postpartum as the moment the woman has her baby. There's postpartum for women as well when they lose their baby. And it's extremely difficult because you don't have a baby to show for it. And I'm part of a group where, I've met women that had stillbirths, that had a newborn loss, and it's it's almost people dismiss it as if it's a miscarriage. It's like, no, no, they held their baby. They had their baby for a week or two and it passed. Um, and postpartum is real. And so it's kind of how do we support women going through postpartum, right? And especially if they've lost at the same time. So you're right. It's kind of like women are we do the best that we can with what we have. And I applaud women like you, moms that are doing the best to be present for your living babies when you're also thinking about your babies that are now they call angels or however you want to see them. But I think that's how I try to find peace. Where I read a good book that my cousin recommended. It was called Spirit Babies, and it was kind of like this helpful way of to understand kind of like you try to make reasoning when anyone passes away. You want to find a reason, right? Like why did that happen? Why, well, whether it was through pregnancy loss, murder, whatever, any type of form of loss, you want some kind of resolution to what happened. And the book I thought was helpful because more on the spiritual side of how possibly maybe my babies that I carried with me, that I felt them, I heard their heartbeats, all these were just moments in time that these babies wanted to feel that what it meant to be alive, technically, to have this presence. And that was it for them, to move on to become spirit babies. That's what they call it. And I felt that book gave me some peace, whether people believe it in or not. And I'm not even sure if I do. It was just something that I needed to be able to grasp to make some sense of this frustration. Because there is a lot of resentment. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of frustration when you're like, why is it, people that don't even want kids, or people that are having multiple families, cheating or whatever, or, teenagers or people that are on drugs or whatever, having children easily. And and then I meet this incredible group of women, some that are actually doing this alone as well. Like, shout out to lesbians and to women that are just doing this by themselves, because I have 2 friends that are doing this by themselves. And the fact that they are trying to find a way to move forward, to just do what they need to do to have their babies. And it's just kind of amazing, the emotional, the spiritual side of it, right? But that was a helpful book. If anybody's watching this thinking, oh, Spirit Babies, I can't think of the author's name right now. But I found that one of the most helpful ones to just kind of get through some of that frustration.
I'll link that below, and
Mhm.
some of the other things that you've mentioned as well, like the
Yeah.
the group that you
Yeah, it was called
um
Resolve on the
yeah.
organization. It's a nonprofit. And then the other one, it's a local nonprofit that was called Footprints. And oh, here's a helpful I didn't even know these existed, these support groups. So I knew the Resolve, which was for infertility groups, and you could do these online. But there's also types of support groups. So there's support groups for miscarriages, for stillbirth, for newborns, support groups for fathers, right? For fathers to be, for grandparents, for uncles and aunts that were and my brother had the most beautiful conversation with me after I think around Christmas time. He's like, I had one day where he's like, I had one day that I just cried all day for you. Cause I'm like, he was excited to be an uncle too. We gave him this cute little, like we have the cutest video. I actually put it on my Instagram because I said, this is probably one of the most beautiful moments I had with my brother, like the excitement of him becoming an uncle. And there's support groups for them as well. And there's support groups that the footprints it's called Forever Footprints is the organization. And the woman who started is amazing. She's actually executive director, has two kids, living kids, but she's had two miscarriages, and then she had her 16-year-old son died unexpectedly as well. And so she talks about her grief for each one of her children and at different times in her life, right? And the pain that she had to endure. And I think, wow, when you hear women like that knew the support needed to be there. And so the fact that there's all these type of support groups, and then I found one that's pregnancy after loss. So not pregnancy loss, which they exist, but pregnancy after loss. And once again, it's just hearing other women what their pregnancy is like and how they've learned to overcome or at least deal with, the frustrations and the fears and doubts that they have because they've had pregnancy losses before. So the fact that there's all these types of resources, and a lot of them are free nonprofits, or you can, donation based. And so I think it's important to support them too, because a lot of these organizations never existed before. And now that they're there, we need to share more light because that it really can help so many women. And I think Australia or New Zealand is the one country that actually does give you maternity leave, or sorry, they call it, oh, I forgot, leave for, you get maternity leave when you have a baby, or if you lost a loved one, you have a few days off from work. But this is for anyone that's had a miscarriage. They get, I believe it's up to I want to say it's a month or 3 months off. And that is so important and needed because for me, I couldn't function the first 2 months after my DNC. I couldn't even get out of bed some days. Like it was just so difficult. And when we start to hopefully advocate with organizations, companies, and people around the insurances around the world to say, hey, there should be some leave for women that have gone through this loss because it's so traumatic. It's so physically, emotionally, everything draining. And so I think I want to say it's New Zealand. I might be Australia, but I know New Zealand when I had just announced that a couple of years ago, and I thought, bravo. And I go, how is it the States are still behind?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I'm in Australia, but I wouldn't know. I've never like I haven't been
Yeah, we'll
working
have to
since.
check after this. I want to say it's New Zealand then, but I know I was like, they're doing it right. That's what I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I haven't been working since I had my kids, so I wouldn't know into like entirely, but I mean if I could, I totally would if I was working, take that time because yeah, you're right, it does do a number on you, and you do need that time, and not every woman gets that time, and some women just go straight back out to work and you're like, how are you doing that?
Right.
And the real answer there is they're not
Right.
doing both. They're
Right.
going to work,
Yeah.
and they're kind of like trying to leave everything else,
Yeah. And
at home or in a box.
yeah, they're trying to push their emotions to the side and move forward. There's some movies I wish I would have written down, but on Netflix there's one, I believe it's called One More Shot. Great actors, but Giuliani, I think is his name, and I'm going blank on the actress, but it really does a good, I think one of the best depictions of what it looks like for couples that are going through IVF and to fertility treatments, and it's a really hard movie to watch too, but it's a good movie that I think everybody needs to watch to see how we support each other, how to support couples or people that are going through this alone. Because yeah, there's just so much. Like we don't know, right? Until we go through it ourselves or we see other people go through it. And when we talk about it too, we learn how to advocate for ourselves because that's one thing that's been really scary. A lot of us don't know what we should be telling the doctors and what we're not comfortable with. And when I did that episode of the DNC, when I talked about how much it costs and what we went through, I had a few people that reached out to me, women that said, I had no idea that I could have had my DNC with full anesthesia. That one of them had to be awake through it, and she didn't know that that was an option. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I couldn't imagine going through that physical pain as well, right? And so, or being awake for that too. So and once again, it's education and knowing what is available to help women through that process.
Yeah, I actually birthed the sac,
Wow.
and when I went in for another ultrasound later to when I was going through like to make sure it was finished,
Yeah.
everything out, the radiologist said, "Oh, did you take it in to get looked at, like to
Oh,
get
biopsy.
tested?"
Yeah. Hmm.
And I was like, I didn't even know I could have done that. Like I didn't, I was just like, oh no, but I
Yeah.
didn't even know I could have done that
Yeah. They
giving
don't.
birth to that at home.
Yeah. There's no warning. And you know what? Luckily, I thank goodness my OB, she did the test on her own without me asking because I had no idea. Once again, I didn't know like you. And until my reproductive doctor asked, did I get that test? I was like, I have no idea. And when I reached out to her, she's like, yeah, I actually just sent it over to them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm glad you did. Because then now I knew because as one thing when we lose, right? It's like we blame ourselves. And I know that's something they always say don't do, but we can't help but think of like, maybe I ate that chip I shouldn't have, or, maybe I shouldn't have vacuumed that day, or, you start to blame and think, what did I do wrong? All these, and luckily my doctors were wonderful. And they're like, it was nothing you did wrong. Even if you would have done everything 100% perfect, it was an imbalanced chromosome because of the biopsy that we knew as well. So, and because of my age, that there was just that high probability. But once again, like, yeah, you just don't know, right? You just kind of go through the motions and I think sometimes that's hard within the medical field that they need to also get educated on how do you proceed? How do you tell someone that they've lost their baby and how do we normalize it and make it more humanizing as opposed to like, oh, this just happened to you. It's like, I'm sorry, what? It's hard to process everything.
Yeah, and even if they make it more people more aware of the costs and the financial burden as well, because obviously, I mean, you going through loss and then like getting treated a certain way when you're getting those treatments and those moments of like D&C and things
Yeah.
like that, you know, I mean, in any case, there should be a certain level of respect and like care there, and it
Yeah.
really is lacking. Like people just think, oh, well, you can just try again. Sometimes that's literally the thought process,
Yeah.
Well, like,
Yeah.
well, you're more fertile now. Um,
Yeah. And
have you
and I
had
heard
that
that
one?
so much and partly that's why we, kind of rush back into it too. Or like, okay, this is the time um and so yeah, you're right. It's kind of once again, it's like, okay, you got to ask yourself and then you got to do some research and talk to your specialist because I think um if it wasn't for me asking questions or learning the process or hearing other women share their amazing, incredibly difficult stories, I wouldn't have learned. Like, I remember one thing I always tell my husband, I learned from one group that the lady's like, you can always ask for a different needle. And because she said that she went in to get her for IVF treatment, they gave her the needles, and she's like, "Is there any chance that there's like smaller needles?" And she goes, and the nurse was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I just got the first needles I saw, but yeah, there's smaller ones." And it's like, you could even ask for that. So once again, it's educating yourself and learning how to advocate for yourself because when you don't know, you don't know, and so it's wonderful when women do share their difficulties because hopefully we learn from what they went through.
Yeah, wow. Isn't that annoying? Like, oh, I just grabbed the first needle I saw. Like, not even like
Yeah.
asking you or anything.
Yeah. So
Asking her like, hey, do you mind what needle it is? Or, I mean, if they
yeah.
asked women, I think we'd all say the smaller one, obviously.
Right.
Like,
The
who wants a
joys.
big one?
Exactly. Yeah, and
It'll
thank
be
you
fun.
again for doing an event like this, and I'm hoping I can provide as much information support for women. They can follow me on Instagram. All my social media handles are Fin Savvy Latina, two E's, and I think that's one of the things for me that's been helpful is not just therapy and support groups, but journaling, and I've been writing, and ideally, I'm like I think I want to write a book on that particular subject because it's needed, and um I always think about like, okay, well, I started doing what I do because of my expertise. And it's like, well, it's hard to say it, but yeah, you start going through so much that you've learned a lot. And ideally you want other people to learn from either your mistakes or, what you wish you would have known. But ideally also how to save money and just try to figure out what's best for you too, because I think that's something too. Like if you want to keep trying naturally, that's also your prerogative, but know everything behind that too. Because I think that's the hardest part too. I would get random DMs, through Instagram or was it through Facebook, and they're like, oh, you know what, I did this and this helped me get naturally, or they're natural fertility, specialists, and they're not doctors, but they're specialists, and they're like, I can help you get pregnant naturally, and I'm like, I don't have a problem getting pregnant. It's staying pregnant. So once again, it's people understanding that there's more to it than just assuming that. Yes, getting pregnant is half the battle, but it's also understanding there's so much biology behind it as well.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many different like things that there are that, can either go wrong or that just, don't work or whatever. Like, yeah, that you can't you fix, there's no one size fits all. There's so many different options, there's so many different things. And I think, yeah, write a book about it. That would be amazing. And even if you go from a financial perspective as well, because you have the understanding of how much it costs, and that it's
Yeah.
not just a physical emotional toll, there's like a financial toll which then adds to that, and it's just this
Yeah.
layered up effect of just, having to deal
Yeah.
with so much.
And the
um
legality behind it
yeah,
too, right? Like a lot of people just think, even if your insurance does cover it, it's like there's also a lot of legal paperwork that you have to deal with too, because what happens if you have extra embryos? Do you want them to be donated to science or to another couple that's having fertility problems, or discard them? Like all these, and it's so crazy because it's all these questions that you have to have with your partner as well if you're not going through the donor route. Because yeah, it's once again, it's like this. Um, it's not just a regular procedure that you're going through. It's a life-changing thing that can be for yourself or for another couple too, right?
yeah,
And so
no one's
yeah,
actually
that's
mentioned
my
that.
joy. My goal is to write as much about what I've learned and from some of the experts that I've learned, because I wish there was something like that out there. Hmm.
Yeah, no one's actually mentioned the legal paperwork to me before. So I didn't actually know, so thank you. um
Yeah. Oh, there's more to it. Yeah, and it's yeah. Once
yeah,
once again, there's paperwork. There's medical, if something were to happen to you, like all these things, and their procedures, their surgeries. So you also have to be aware that they're also, they say they're low risk surgeries, but things happen too. You just never know.
yeah, I mean, you'd think it would just be a logical thing to think, oh yeah, you'd have to fill out a lot of paperwork, but yeah, you just don't, it doesn't click. It's just like oh, I can still have a miscarriage even with going through fertility treatment.
Yeah.
You don't think that because you're like,
Oh
well,
yeah.
they know what they're
That's
doing.
the heartbreaking part. I've had friends that have done IVF and have gotten pregnant and have lost. And I think, oh, that's just as harsh too, because you're like, you went through this whole thing and you picked the right egg and you picked the right sperm, and it's still, it didn't happen. And so, yeah, it's all these other factors. You're right.
Yeah. And one of our speakers, she was actually going to talk to me about IVF and how that goes, but she herself went through IVF, and just a few days before our interview, which I didn't know, she had gone through a loss, and it was, right at the end of the first trimester.
Wow.
And she was like, it literally can happen to anyone, even
Yeah.
people who work in fertility and know about the stuff. And she was saying that there was nothing wrong, like it was perfectly normal. And
Yeah.
she's
And, and,
that's
and,
the
and
kicker.
it's a gambling. It's one of those, I say it's one of the most difficult gambling games you have, because the odds are so low and so difficult to deal with the stats, right? And there's still just not enough research, and a lot of people don't understand that IVF hasn't been around for barely 40 years. So there's still a lot of things that are happening that are changing, and everybody's different. Everybody is different. And I think also getting rid of that misconception that people automatically say, oh, what's wrong with you? Or what's wrong with him? And it's like, I've met some extremely healthy people. Um, that still lost. I met extremely unhealthy people that have had kids, so it's this, all these different factors. And you're right. It's just kind of getting ourselves educated and at least speak. And I think at the end of the day, like, my purpose today to be able to talk with you and share this with all these people that are watching this is hopefully give them hope as well. But ideally is hopefully to start those conversations or know how to support others or themselves, to find out what they can support, how they can support themselves through such a difficult process, because it's life-changing. And I love how someone had mentioned to me and said, once you have a pregnancy loss or gone through infertility, whatever procedures you might have had, you're forever changed as a person. You can never go back to that person that you used to be. And I think about that. I'm like, I used to be this bubbly, happy person, which I think I still am, but I know I'm very different. And it's because the joy that, you get from your baby, the joy that that's how I explain it to people. I'm like, imagine being the happiest you've ever been, and then all of a sudden being the saddest you've ever been. That's how it is. And so I think it's important that hopefully people walk away. It's like, okay, this is how I can show up for my friend. This is how I can help support my spouse or my partner going through this, because it's something that we shouldn't go through alone. And I wish it on nobody. I hope nobody goes through this, but it's like you said, it's the worst group to be a part of, but with the best people that are there to hopefully hold your hand.
Yeah. And I think if there was, like you said, more understanding and more education, like we're doing, sharing this, it would help. So if anyone's watching and you want to share, if you don't, that's fine. Keep it with you. And and if you do get ready and if you do want to share, then do so, because the more people that share what's going on, I think the bigger the conversation will get and the more understanding there'll be. And I mean, I would even talk to people where I'm like, maybe we should go back to our doctors and tell them, you suck and you're wrong and you need to be like nicer, because I've had some doctors that have said things to me and you don't go back.
Yeah. And then you try, I have a cousin who's an OB, and, I think about how difficult that is for them too. It's like, how do you tell someone that's been preparing for this? And so, you kind of go through the process of, there's so many different angles and perspectives that happen, but I want to thank you all for having me. And I look forward to seeing how this can change and how these conversations can, make of a difference and for people that are going through something like this. So thank you so much, Ella, for having me. And I know you're going to be helping so many people, not just in Australia, but all over the world. And it's important to have this type of resource.
Thank you so much for being part of this. And it couldn't happen without all the speakers and people sharing their story like you. So thank you so much. And thank you for your time. And when you do that book, let me know and I'll totally link it.
Absolutely.
Be adding it to the resources so people know about it, because it's so necessary and so amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, you take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Please note that all speakers, including experts and professionals, express information, views, and opinions that should not be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any medical conditions. If you have a medical issue, please consult a qualified professional. Speakers voice their own views, opinions, and conclusions, and they may not reflect the views, opinions, and conclusions of other speakers. Ella Rose, The Joy of Sunflowers, and its sponsors may not endorse all or any of the views, opinions, or conclusions expressed.